Thank you. You too. Hi. So before I begin today, I'd just like to ask a really quick question to the audience. Could you put your hands up if you've ever been so scared in your life, so frightened, that a little bit of pee has come out? Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Look at me. OK, you can put your hands down now. That was about 43% of the audience. And hopefully by the end of today, I'll increase that number a little bit, because today we're talking about web security. Now, the title talk is How to Hack an Angular App, and I will be talking about Angular briefly, but I've got a very short amount of time. So another way to talk about it is how to hack a web app. And actually, another title for this talk could be Real-Life Hacking Stories. Now, that's because I'm going to be talking about web security by telling you 3 different hacking stories. But my goal really isn't to teach you anything. My goal is to get you to pee yourselves. So thank you for the intro. My name is Asim Hussain. You can find me on Twitter as Jawake. I blog about Angular and JavaScript on my site, codecraft.tv. And I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft, which means, well, you can chat to me whenever you see me about whatever you want. But if you chat to me about Azure, I'll probably bring out my notebook and start making some notes. I'm also an instructor on Udemy, which is a teaching platform. And recently, they've just added in subtitlings. And thankfully, finally, they've replaced my name with the word awesome. So my name is Awesome, and this talk is going to be very Asim. So I'm not a security expert. I'm a web developer. I'm a web developer that got hacked one day, so I learned a thing or two about it. So I'm going to be teaching you really the basics, right? And I'm going to be teaching you some of the terminology as well. So this is just some of the terminology. A vulnerability is just a hole in your security. So not setting up a firewall is just a vulnerability. An exploit is a series of commands, a series of steps, things that you do to take advantage of a vulnerability to do bad things. OK? Real clear? OK, we're going to start off with the first story. Equifax. OK. So who heard of this Equifax hack last year? OK, a fair amount of the audience. So it's one of the largest hacks in history. I think the latest number is 184 million people's records were taken. Equifax is a $1 billion company, 10,000 employees. But before I explain what happened, let's again dig into a little bit more of terminology. So a zero-day exploit is just an exploit that we don't know about yet. It's private. Okay, it's a secret. But once a zero-day exploit becomes known, becomes in the public domain, we don't call it a zero-day exploit anymore. We just call it an exploit. You might think of it as a 6-month exploit or a 1-year exploit or something like that. And that's because the value of the exploit goes down over time because it's public, so people start releasing fixes and patches for their software. Okay? How hard do you think it would be to get hold of a zero-day exploit? Very hard, right? You need to roll in the right circles. It costs a lot of money as well. How hard do you think it would be to get hold of an exploit that's been in the public domain for 6 months? Pretty easy, super easy. In fact, just Google it. There's loads of websites out there. This is one called ExploitDB. I'm just going to search PHP, just for fun. If you scroll down, it was still in 2017. All you've got to do is click on one of these links, and it gives you details about the exploit and how to apply the exploit. OK. So did Equifax get hacked by a zero-day exploit? No. They got hacked through a known vulnerability in their web framework, Apache Struts, that had already been fixed for 2 months. All they had to do to protect themselves was install an update. That's it. Now, there are a couple of laughs in the audience, but this is actually much, much more common than you might think. Sneak is a web securities firm, and they do lots of reports. This is one from 2016. Yep. So 12 of the top 50 data breaches were through known vulnerabilities. That's about 25%. Another report from last year said that 77% of that number of sites were using vulnerable JavaScript libraries. Let's talk about Angular. So who here is using the latest version of Angular? Put your hands up. Who here isn't using the latest version of Angular? There we go. If you look at the Angular docs website for both AngularJS and Angular IO and modern Angular, you'll see that the #1 security item is keep updated to the latest version, the #1. And this is why. This is the reason why, because attacking a website through a known vulnerability is incredibly, incredibly easy, one of the most common ways to get access to a site. And we talk about migrating a lot. There's always issues when you want to upgrade to the latest version. Next time you're trying to convince your manager that you want to do it, just say Equifax. What are some of the things you can do? Well, if you host your code on GitHub, they added in, end of last year, some features into the dependency graph. So it will scan your package JSON, look at the version numbers, look in one of those databases. If it is using a version which has a vulnerability, it will report it and let you know with a big warning message when you look at your GitHub repo. If that's not your bag and you've got some kind of CI tooling, you can use things like NSP from Node Security, which essentially gives you the same thing but on the command line. And also Sneak.io have their own web version, web tooling as well, which you can use. So just to summarize, it's pretty easy to hack somebody through a known vulnerability. You just got to Google stuff, and it happens a lot more than we think. How are people feeling? We good? All right. Let's see. Next story. GitHub. So this is a story of, so GitHub has a bug bounty. They pay you if you find a security hole in your software. And this is a report from an expert called Orange Sai. This is Orange's Twitter. Please follow Orange. He's a good guy, lots of great stuff he tweets out. And this is his bug. This is his issue that he found with GitHub. I think it's a fascinating story. It reads like a heist movie, so I love it. And I want to share it with you. Okay? And I'm going to share it a little bit differently. I'm actually going to show you a video that Orange created to prove that he had hacked GitHub, and I'm going to show you it now. So it's GitHub Enterprise. Basically, to trigger this hack, to set up this hack, what you've got to do is add a webhook URL. Just a webhook URL. So he's going to go into his repo, add webhook. The URL is a little bit complicated, so he opens up a terminal, runs a Python script to print out the URL. And he's going to paste that into the webhook section now. Now, to actually trigger this exploit, all you've got to do is do a search. Just a search. Okay? So this is just something he's printing out so you can see what command gets executed. To trigger it, he's just going to type a search, anything, ggggg, runs a search, command gets executed on the server. It's the ID command on Linux. Just adding in a webhook URL, doing a search, ran a command on the server. Anybody scared? Let's figure out how he did it, yeah? So webhooks. If you do a git push, you can set it up so it does a post to some URL. Okay, and what Orange discovered was that they'd forgot to check for 0. So 0 resolves to localhost on certain machines. Okay, so that means when you do the post, it posts back onto the server behind the firewall, behind any security that you've got going. But what on the server found graphite. So process is running on the server. And you can actually do, if you do post it to this endpoint in Graphite, it's going to call a piece of code, a piece of Python code. Don't be scared. I'll explain it to you step by step. So this is the code itself. What it does is it gets the URL from the query parameters, and then does a GET request with it. Okay? So if this is the webhook URL, the whole URL is going to get posted to. That send email function is going to extract the red URL, and it's going to do a GET request to it. So all it's doing is it's converting a post into a GET. That's it. Pretty innocent, right? But that's two exploits that he's chaining together already. But the thing is, it's using something called a HTTP connection library, and this has a known vulnerability in some of the versions of Python, some of the recent versions of Python, has a known vulnerability. And that vulnerability is called carriage return line feed injection. So carriage return, \r, is new line on Windows. \n is new line on everything else. So this is a cross-platform way of doing new line. Okay, but what can you do with this? Well, you can convert it to hex, ODOA, no biggie. But then what if you did a GET request to this URL? In fact, what is a GET request? Actually, what is HTTP? Does anybody know? I mean, we're all web developers here. We all know what HTTP is, right? No? OK, I'll explain it. So maybe we've seen something that looks like a little bit like this. Maybe we've done a curl request, or we're looking at some network panel in some browser. We've seen something that looks like this. This is the HTTP protocol. Okay? So what it does is it opens up a TCP connection to this host and this port, and it starts sending each of these lines as strings to that host port, ending with carriage return line feed. Okay? And the other side knows the HTTP message is complete because it sends two carriage return line feeds in a row. All right. But the HTTP connection library converted those ODOAs to carriage return line feed, so it basically turns into this. And this is actually just a malformed HTTP message. If you sent this, it would return back 400 because hello is not part of the HTTP protocol. OK, so Orange has now found a way to send a malformed HTTP message. Not a big issue, right? But what if instead of that, you sent to this? Does anybody know what this port number is? What process is it? Any guesses? Memcache. This is a memcache. Memcache doesn't speak HTTP. Memcache speaks memcache. So what happens when you do a HTTP request to this? It gets turned into this. Again, opens up a TCP connection to this host, this port, which is memcache. You're then going to send to memcache this first line as a string. Memcache doesn't know what this line is. Memcache just throws it away. It thinks it's an error. Then you send memcache a second line, and memcache is like, I know what this is. I can speak this. And what this actually does is it sets data on the key with these other numbers, are kind of timeout parameters, right? And then the rest of the stuff just gets ignored because memcache just ignores it. What this is something called protocol smuggling. Within the HTTP protocol, you're smuggling the memcache protocol using a HTTP library to speak memcache. What's the big deal? Well, we all use memcache, whether we think we use memcache or whether we don't think we use memcache. We all use memcache at some level or another in our websites, right? And what happens is we serialize some code into a string, we store it in memcache, we deserialize the code, and then we execute it. All good. But what Orange found a way of doing is basically changing what's in memcache. So then you serialize your code, you store it in memcache, you then deserialize your code, you then execute your code, but you're not executing your code. You're executing Orange's code. And what he'd figured out how to do was store a certain object or change the representation of a certain object inside memcache, so just the act of deserializing it executes a command on the server. That's what he did. How you all feeling now? I'm afraid we don't have time for you to go to the toilet. But what's a summary? And the summary here is that big exploits come from smaller exploits. You chain them together. Right? We all think that when we're going to get attacked through one giant security hole in our application. We don't. It's much more subtle than that, which is why hacking stories are so interesting, right? Because you'll chain multiple different exploits together. Last story. Who can tell me what that code does? That's right. So it takes your environment variables and converts them into a base 64 string. Okay. What about this? It's taking that environment variable, turning into HTTP post requests, and posting them to my server. So who here stores passwords, connection strings in environment variables on their server? Unless the rest of you are hard coding them in your scripts, I don't know what's going on, right? But yeah, the common way to deal with a lot of this security stuff is to store like the sensitive information in environment variables and only use them in your application. So what if I told you I could make you run this code on your server and send me all of your environment variables? Do you believe me? No, maybe not. I'll reveal a little bit more. The script's called package-setup.js. Okay, a little bit more. This is an NPM module. This is a setup script for an NPM module. If you just install this NPM module, you'll be sending me all of your environment variables. You're probably thinking, well, why would I install your NPM module, Asim? And I don't know, you're right. I don't have very many popular modules on NPM, unfortunately. But did anybody see this end of last year? So they thought that Kent Dodd's package called CrossM had been somehow corrupted to steal environment variables. But in fact, it wasn't that. What it was this. So cross-env is the good one. Cross-env, without the hyphen, is the hacked one. All it was the same code with a different package setup script published to NPM. This is actually a really common issue. It's called typo squatting. It's a really common issue. It's cross-language. All languages have got these issues. Python's got it. Everybody's got it. And it's a really big issue. And we all do it, right? I often, when I'm installing from NPM, I can't remember if it's got a hyphen. If it doesn't have a hyphen, I'll try it without, and it works. They're great. Yeah? But think about it. When you're installing from NPM, what are you doing? You're giving somebody that you've probably never, ever met in your entire life the ability to run code as if it was you, behind your firewall, access to all of your keys, everything. So what's the summary? I think the summary is that we're a little bit too trusting. And I think it's because it's open source, right? We instantly trust everything that's open source. If it's an open source project, we might think it's got a vulnerability. We'll never expect it to have an exploit. But this one did. In fact, it was up for 2 weeks before it was discovered. CrossEnv, I think, is downloaded about 2 million times a month. Okay, so just a few little spelling errors and people would have had that installed in their computer. So what are some solutions? Well, on NPM, you can install stuff under a scope, under a private scope. This probably maybe indicates to you why Angular is under @Angular, right? Only if you own this scope can you add any package underneath there, right? But they've recently added in some interesting rules, some package moniker rules. So if there's a package already called package-name, you now cannot deploy a package which changes only by punctuation. Okay? That's something that's happened recently. How's everybody feeling now? I think we've got a break after this, so you're all good. Okay, to summarize, keep everything updated, right? Update all the things. No one wants to be that person in the meeting room with their CEO telling them why the company's failed because you couldn't be bothered to install an update. There's no such thing as a small vulnerability. Fix it. And did the NPM issue scare anybody? Yeah? I don't have a solution for that. So it's a unicorn. So thank you very much. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter as Joik. I can wait. No? You can follow me on Joik, and I'll be posting up the slides later on after the conference. Thank you very much for your time.